So now we turn for a quick transition and a spark speech, a bit of inspiration to kick us off into the afternoon. We're joined by our partners from Johns Hopkins University, the Ideals Institute, who've been working with THREAD over the last several months on an early childhood educator wage and study analysis, the unveiling of which was yesterday at the Beartooth. They shared their research in full yesterday during that afternoon session, and we wanted to make sure that you heard about their work as well. Joining us today are Christine Alexander, Director of Workforce Development at the Hopkins Ideals Institute, and Dr. Lieny Jeon, Director of Research at the Hopkins Ideals Institute. Both have extensive and impressive experience, and we've had the privilege of partnering with them over the last several months as the THREAD Leadership Committee worked on supporting and implementing this project. So please join me in welcoming Christine and Lieny to Alaska and to today's event. Thank you for both of us for joining us. So we've got one of you. Lieny, are you coming up? Yes, she is as well. Okay, good. All right, and here they come.
So, hello everyone. I'm actually here more representing the work of my colleague Lieny Jeon, who compliments of THREAD, conducted some surveys and interviews with the early childhood workforce here in Alaska. It's been great to kind of participate the last day in the different events because even though Lieny's work represents a smaller sample. What we heard this morning from the McDowell group, certainly Lieny's work reinforces or was reinforced by those same kind of statistics. So that was pretty interesting. I didn't realize that I really should also be thanking Rachel and Laura for my little setup here, which will make sense here in a minute. I'm just not sure. Do I just press this button and I'm ready to go? Let's see what we get. Well, maybe not that button. Yes. So actually, we just heard about a because moment, and what I've realized is that this actually is a Horton moment as well. For those early educators, or just in general, if you've spent time with children in whatever role you serve, and you've had an opportunity to revisit some child literature, you'll often find that there are adult messages hidden within those pages. And what I realized is that Alaska, I think you have experienced what I'm calling a Horton moment. If you know the story, it's a story of Horton hears a who, and what Horton heard was this tiny, tiny voice that rallied a whole speck dust village to make themselves known. And that is what I understand the early childhood community and you as their supporters did for turning changing some minds among your legislature, which you are to be commended for. So you can see, you're right, you've got to make noise in greater amounts. Open your mouth, lad, for every voice counts. And we are here to share the voices of the folks here that we surveyed. So who are those folks? Oh, wait a minute. No, I'm going to start actually at a much higher level, which is representing the work of Marcy Whitebook, who has been the key author on these economic studies and reports on the early childhood workforce. And in the most recent one, 2018, she makes a note that the current efforts to transform the workforce has really focused on the educators themselves, and through increased training and professionalizing the field. And what's been really interesting is, again, pressure goes on to the teachers who are already doing so much, when in fact we're not addressing what the root issue is. And the root issue is those jobs and the financing of this field in general. And so all of you who are here, Thread in general is really to be commended for recognizing and taking a very bold step to address that issue and start to examine what are at the root of the wage and compensation of your early childhood community and what steps can be taken to do something about that. So the voices we heard were from 288 early childhood educators, 16 early childhood leaders. You'll notice that we had 49% of our participants were actually at a supervisory, director, or specialist level. And that's somewhat significant, you'll see in a couple of slides, because what that did is it skewed our data when we went to analyze what is the salary of the workforce here. So you'll see that in a minute. We had 21% lead teachers, 11 assistant teachers. Their ages ranged from 15 to over 64. They had less than 1 year to 47 years in the field, and the majority of them were college educated. And that's somewhat significant as well because these are people who have invested in their education and yet with little promise of economic return on that investment. So what we want to do, and I'm not quite sure here how this works, but if somebody could cue this one up, this is the actual voice of one of the participants in our study. So can I activate this somehow? Oh, there we go. Oh, let's see. There we go.
And I think that the public in general is not well informed about what the impact or the importance of early childhood funding is, I think even within the field of early childhood, I have a lot of new teachers who are very surprised to see research studies that show that investment in birth through age 5 has far larger dividends and far larger gains over a child's lifespan than investment in, K through 6, 6 through 12, any of the other points in education. I think that research is still new enough that the public is not super aware of it, and a lot of people don't understand the value of early childhood education in terms of real dollars down the line, or how much money you save if you invest in early childhood education in terms of costs later on.
So the question is, where do these impressions come from? Where do people in the field get the impression and don't really realize that the research says their work returns a greater investment than in other, even other educators who teach children of older ages? This is very similar to, I think, some of the things we saw this morning. So you'll see this is actually a national survey, but the McDowell's group's work shared similar data about in Alaska that early childhood educators earn less than gas station attendants. This on a national level, very similar to what we've already heard, which is early childhood educators are in fact earn less than what we pay people to take care of our pets. And so that's a pretty striking statement. No wonder that we don't, we struggle to kind of let people know the importance of this work. And then you'll also see, despite the fact that research shows that early investments really pay off far better, as you look at the increase in the ages and who teaches those folks, the people who teach the oldest students actually end up being paid the most. So this morning we want to thank actually everybody who had a chance to hop in and take our little informal research and participate in that. We're going to just take a quick minute to compare what those results were with what our survey participants said. So our first question was, I'm passionate about my work, my job inspires me. And it's really encouraging to see that over 80% of us, in fact, agreed that our work inspires us and that we are very passionate about what we do. I hope that the people who fell on the other end, which could very well be two of my colleagues just who helped me test this, so that's really what I'm hoping. But just merely being involved in this type of work, be it part of your profession or not, we hope that you realize that, that there is inspiration there and that you feel passionate about your involvement. This is what the early childhood educators told us. 92% of them feel passionate and excited about the work. 93% enjoy working with the children. It makes them feel successful and accomplished. 72% say their job inspires them. 81% are satisfied being an early childhood educator. And believe it or not, 2/3 would still choose to enter the field knowing what they know now. And this is all despite the low wages and feelings of inadequate compensation. Taking that just a little bit deeper, when we asked the question, why have you chosen to work in the field of early childhood or school-age education, the strongest responses came back with, it's because of supporting children's development and their enjoyment for working with children. You won't be surprised that this outnumbered job security, formal benefits, social status. I'm thinking the people who chose this as a reason they entered the field were just really kind of, we're joking, but perhaps not. And I really do encourage that kind of attitude, and certainly income. From our survey this morning, the question was, I earn $39,000 a year or more. And not surprisingly, many of us actually have that luxury. Because among the early childhood workforce, and like I said, this data is skewed because of the number of people who had supervisory type positions. 18%, half on average, our participants were earning $18 an hour or just over $39,000. But if you look down at the other teachers and the other positions, assistant teachers are less, they are able to earn less. Despite the important role that any of us who have been in the classroom and had assistant teachers, we know the importance of that role. And 40.9% of our participants are the sole source of income in their household. My wages cover my family's living expenses, and again, I see this as a real privilege to a certain extent. Because again, in our survey, only 17% of the people we surveyed were able to answer that question. And then 83% responded that their either most or only part of their expenses were covered by their wages. And about half of the participants said they intended to leave their positions within 5 years, citing low pay and benefits, which leads to that problem of turnover that we have talked about this morning, and I think we all understand what a challenge that is. I would stay in my current job even if I earned $26,000 a year or less. And not surprising, not many of us would volunteer for that particular role. But in fact, when we asked if you had an opportunity to leave this program, what would you most likely do? 29% said they would not choose to leave. 24% said Even if they chose to leave that particular program, they would still stay in the field. My work contributes to a better future for Alaska, and this actually is quite encouraging that even among us, we all feel like the work that all of you are doing is in fact making a difference. And the same is true for whoever responded, which could again be my two colleagues, and yet hopefully they realize that through the research that they've done in the support of this program, that in fact they have contributed, or at least we hope, even though we are based on the other coast, that somehow our work efforts are contributing to a better future for Alaska. And in terms of early childhood, and if you've seen No Small Matters, you realize that the work of the early childhood workforce does in fact impact not only the state of Alaska and its future, but the future of our nation. Because research shows that more than 1 million neural connections are formed every second in those first few years of life. And in Alaska, what this means is that there are 38,000 children approximately under the age of 6 who are in need of care. You have just over 2,200 early childhood educators who are helping to form those neural connections. They are educated, they are committed, they are passionate about their work, and they're drastically undercompensated. So what's to be done? If we go back to Marcy Whitebook's work, she says that, and we totally agree, the time is long overdue to move from the question of why our nation must improve early childhood jobs to focus on how to make that happen. In your pack, we hope that on the tables you'll see some of the executive summary, some copies of the executive summary of our research, and in the very, very back you'll see a chart of recommendations. And this morning you heard some terrific recommendations from the McDowell group. Actually, Laura just now also presented some very easily recommendations that can start now. And her film is No Small Matters, and I would like to say that no step is too small. So it can begin by you talking to a neighbor, encouraging them, helping them understand the importance of the work that those child care workers are doing every single day. We hope that you're going to take some of these recommendations into the work this afternoon as you do your design thinking, but we're going to break a couple of them down here. One of our recommendations is to begin by establishing and narrowing this gap in the wages between the early childhood educator and the K-12 world. And it can begin as simply as moving that little mark, and it seems like a little, and it is a high-cost investment, but if we go back again and think about the return of investment on those early years, it more than pays off. We also recommend taking measures to increase availability and access to the benefits across the early childhood workforce. This graph from Lieny's work shows that family child care providers are the ones who are most at risk for not having access to benefits, particularly when it comes to retirement. It's next at risk are those assistant teachers, like I said, who are so important to the work that we all do. A short-term goal could be just to incorporate some of those benefits into the current QRIS system that you have called Learn and Grow. A longer-term goal might be to form partnerships with insurance and retirement communities to kind of put together some affordable packages that at least increase the accessibility and availability to this workforce. We encourage everyone in the Alaska community and actually nationally to seek ways to reduce the burden of the workforce's living expenses. And we've talked and thought about ways that you can form partnerships to create these economies of scale, for giving student loans as people increase in their commitment and stay in the field longer. The local credit union, they do a terrific job in providing childcare on site. Perhaps there can be some exploration of, are there ways to offer the early childhood community those some lower interest mortgages? And then again, partnering with local businesses. Is there a way to create verification cards that if an early childhood provider is participating in some of the initiatives like the seed registry or Learn and Grow, that they would get a verification card that in fact could support them to kind of recoup or manage those living expenses. And then something we've just recently kind of stumbled upon, actually, and I am nowhere ready to talk in depth about this concept, but would love it if somebody in the audience can share what their understanding is of social impact bonds. But as I understand it, the way it works is that private investors kind of agree that if we establish certain measurable outcomes and those measurable outcomes are achieved, that money that they originally invested in the system is repaid back to them. So certain measurable outcomes can be things like reducing and measuring educator turnover, gains in that quality rating and improvement system, and increased participation just in general. I was going to share this. We don't really have time, but going back to what I said earlier about the important adult messages that are embedded in children's literature, I really encourage you to explore some of the literature from Peter Reynolds. I have given more Peter Reynolds books to adults than I have to children. And this is actually an animated poem. So if you go to try to find this one, you're not going to find it, but it ends this way, and it says, to improve our schools, we have a choice to listen to the teacher's voice, those many voices far and wide who protect each student's flame inside, with expertise to know what's right, to keep each spirit burning bright. So let's listen to our teachers as we imagine and design schools that keep all flames alight and allow every child to shine. And this is what you can do. You can embrace this moment. You can embrace this Horton moment in which we can capitalize on the brain trust that Thread has brought together in this room today. And as you go into the exercises this afternoon, we hope that you'll capitalize on just the talent and the creative ideas that are here among us and come up with as many solutions as we possibly can for narrowing these gaps and financially rewarding and encouraging the critical people who are in this workforce to stay there and make it worth their investment. We ask you to consider lighting a flame, adopting a child's future, because a person's a person no matter how small. Thank you.